it looks like Dr. Stewart talked about a progressive pair for every day, a computer pair for when you're on the computer with blue light, a good reading pair for when you're reading in bed, and a sunglass pair so that you can drive with your glasses on. So let's take care of all those today. And they have them all there too.
I really wanted to understand the metrics of an early stage practice and also see if they related to longer term practices and what the levers are that are being flipped by an optometrist business owner to make success in an early practice. So I got on the line with our regular guest, Dr. Jennifer Stewart, who's an industry publication editor and an owner of a relatively new practice. And we covered all the areas in a practice where you can unearth data to make a difference, to learn about what you need to do better or different. And I have to say, her insights are gold for any OD business owner. You're going to like what you hear. Check it out.
This is the Think Again podcast.
You've been an owner of a longstanding eye care business in the past, and more recently, you're the founder of a brand new practice, or relatively new. In your experience, are the data insights in both kinds of those eye care businesses similar, or are you finding that you're paying attention to different things?
I think they're very different, because I always said my old practice was like a cruise ship, and the changes that we made there were important, but they would make it was like turning a cruise ship. It was slow. So we could make a change, but because we were seeing so many patients and had so many staff and just so many patient encounters, that changes were seen in the data a little slower. But here, with a smaller practice and a smaller staff and a smaller patient volume, I see those changes almost immediately, which is good and bad. I will say there's a good and bad of that. I have to learn to be a little more patient sometimes when making a change and giving it enough time, where my old practice, I had to give it time, because when we would make a change, it would take so long to move that needle. But here, in a week, I could make a change. So I look at similar metrics and different. I look at everything, but the ones I'm mostly paying attention to, I would say are fairly different here, because this practice can be so much more nimble, and I can make changes that affect profitability and what we're doing on a daily basis much quicker.
Okay, so at the time of this recording in the second half of 2025, how long are you in the practice, and does it still feel new?
So we are just at 18 months. So
Okay.
it is, I have a toddler. So, and I will say it both feels new and also feels like I've been here forever. So I'm starting to see my repeat patients. I've had all these patients that I saw a year ago. So it feels like I've seen them forever already, but it also still feels new, because it's still so exciting to be here. And I really enjoy all of the things that we've created. So it still feels both new, and that I can't imagine my life before this now.
And just briefly, let's do a fingerprint of the practice. How many people?
So I have I would say 1.5 staff. So I have one full-time staff, who's my office manager / optician / technician. And then I have another optician who's here 3 days a week, and she also does we all do everything. So I answer the phone. At pre-test my own patients, I do INRs, I do the optical. So right now, as of today, we have basically 1.5 staff. So we make it work, and it's actually a really efficient, lean practice, but it works really well.
And I think, knowing you the way I do, that you're not humbled and feeling small by doing pretest. You're finding a way to make that an investment in your patients. Maybe some of us can learn that about answering the phone or looking at patients that walk in the practice every now and again, as opposed to just being the specialist that walks in the exam room door.
I learn a lot, and it's easy to set up protocols and things that you want done a certain way. And I will say I hadn't pre-tested a patient in probably 15 years. So it was humbling to learn how to do everything and
Okay.
to do it and to get better at it. But I have no problem jumping in when we need to, or when it frees up other team members. I love the optical, so I'm happily out there picking out glasses. But I, make mistakes just like anybody else. So I think that's been, I think that makes it easier for my staff when they have to help me correct things. I'm not always the one who does everything right.
Well, and there's a leadership quality about this, and I think that's for a different day. So let's talk about metrics. Maybe I'll start with a tough one. Is there a metric in your practice that you feel like, oh, we just aren't there yet? Like it just isn't coming around. Is there anything you can tell me that you're struggling with?
Well, I will say, I guess as a new practice, what most people struggle with is, kind of butts in the chair or exams in general. I don't feel like I'm struggling, but it's also way less than I used to see by design. So I'm seeing way less patients. But we are working hard to increase that. We also work really hard at making, each patient encounter as efficient, effective, and profitable as possible. So just
Even though
like
you have
any,
time in your day, you want to create efficiencies and effectiveness.
yes, yeah. So my goal is still to get that patient out of the exam room in a certain amount of time, whether I have more time than that or not. I still stick to a pretty tight schedule of getting them out into the optical so that I'm not spending all this time chatting with them in the exam room, and then they get out to the optical and they're like, oh my gosh, I was going to buy 4 pairs of glasses, but I got to go get my, my son at
Smart.
school. So while I have that time, it's like that fine balance of having enough. I have plenty of time with the patient, but I'm also cognizant of not wasting that time and giving them all of my time, but also moving them through the practice quickly. So I would say, my prediction, and I'll have to come back on here in a year and see if I'm right. I think year 3 is where we're really going to see a huge growth in our numbers. That's my prediction based on, our first year patients. We know that not every patient comes back in 12 months for their exam. A lot do. But my prediction, we'll see if I'm right, is that year 3, we will see a, significant increase based on the patients who will be coming every year. The patients from year 1 who, my glasses were fine, but now I need to go in, and then all the new patients from year 3. So my prediction is year 3, we will see a big growth in patient encounters as much as I want. I have a limit of how many patients I'd like to see too.
Sure. Feels like a related sidebar question, and I don't need you to be, like to the number, but generally, how many what we might call long appointment available slots or complete exams slots do you have in a regular workday?
So I usually see between 8 and 9 exams. So I'll
Okay.
have about eight or nine exam spots. So I'm seeing a patient now every 45 minutes. I was doing an hour, but we kind of made that a little bit shorter. And I see a patient every 45 minutes where I'll double book, 2 kids or a parent and a kid. But most of the time it's about 8 or 9 exam spots open. I would say I fill usually about 70% of those. So I'm doing pretty well.
And again, this is just maybe off the cuff, but
Yeah.
kind of related to the time they grab the door handle and come in to the time you want to get them out. You said you're trying to be effective there. Is there a number that you shoot for, a number of minutes?
I'd like to get them out of the exam room in 30 minutes
Okay.
from start to finish. So
Yep.
into the optical 30 minutes from when they walk into the door. That's my goal. Even though I have an exam slot of 45 minutes, I don't want to have them in the exam room for 45 minutes. I've had doctors say, "Oh my gosh, you see a patient every hour. How do you sit in there for an hour with them?" I said, "I don't. I can if I need to, and if that's appropriate for the patient, they don't ever feel rushed. But most of the time they're out of my door, my exam door 30 minutes after they've walked into the optical or out the door. So we have some leeway there.
All right, thanks. So I know that as a startup and you being really involved in the design and build, you put an awful lot of effort into the optical part of the business. I know that you spend a lot of time on some of your wheelhouse stats like frame sales per line that you carry. This has got to be critical to the success you've had so far. Tell us a little bit about how you're managing that.
So that's probably the biggest thing I track. And it's
Mhm.
really, for me, every frame, as I've said before in other lectures, every frame pays rent and it takes up a space in the optical. And if it's not paying its rent and its dues, then it's probably not going to, and I say it's not good for me. It's not great for that frame vendor because at the end of the day, we want to sell frames. So if it's not turning over, it's not great for either of us on either side. So I track really carefully our frame sales per vendor to make sure we have an appropriate allotment, whether that's, do we not have enough? Are we selling too many and not replacing them often enough? Or are we over indexed in that line? Did we make a mistake thinking that this line was going to be a good seller here? And I make decisions very quickly and say, you know what, let's sell it off. I'm not going to replace it. Let's put in something else that's going to do a better job. So I don't keep stale inventory. I don't keep lines just to have them. So I track it pretty carefully what's selling so that I can make sure that we have our best sellers on the board.
Are you using software to track that? Are you building your own Excel spreadsheet?
It's all up here. No, I'm kidding. I use the Edge. So I always have it open, and I'm tracking usually monthly and then also quarterly how many frames that we're selling per vendor. And then I usually know how many I have on the board. So I calculate our frame turn, and that will be different for, we have different price points. So my super expensive luxury frames are not going to have a huge frame turn, which is expected. So I don't compare those to maybe a lower cost frame, but I usually look to make sure that we're turning everything over often. And if not, I will ask my team, should we swap out some of these frames? How do you feel about this line? Should we work on keeping this, or should we think about selling it off and then bringing something in that we may be missing? So we work as a team to figure out what holes we have and then make a decision pretty quickly about what we're going to do.
Okay, that makes sense. And then do you kind of come in meetings with the reps armed with this data so they aren't the tail wagging the dog? Like, do you take control of those convos, or do you find, symbiosis because the lines and the vendors you've picked are people that know they have to work with you?
Kind of a mix. So they know me pretty well, most of them. And I say, I don't meet with them often because I order so frequently, and I'm meeting with them less and less because it takes a lot of time. And I usually meet with them at least twice a year to swap out any product that's not moving. But most of the time I reorder every week. Or twice a week. So I never get to the point where they haven't been in a whole quarter and I've got the dregs of their line. And I say, oh yeah, we sold like all your best sellers 3 months ago and I was waiting for you to come in. So they know me pretty well. I mean, they can see what I'm buying, and I'm usually reordering the same frames every week. So they know I have a pretty good handle on it, and know that I'm watching that, and that as soon as we sell something, it goes back in my cart. And Friday, if I haven't placed an order, I'm usually reordering. If at the minimum, sometimes I place 2 orders a week. So they know I have a pretty good sense on what's selling, and they know that I'm, kind of on top of it. So I'm not waiting for their feedback about what we need to do.
I mean, it seems logical. I think for a lot of the listeners to this podcast that are ODs, they don't have that involvement because they aren't at this newer point in their practice. And I think these are the areas where our practices do slide substantially. So great advice. I know you dig in on revenue per patient. I also know that you focus on it relative to your managed vision care plan participation. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there.
So it helps me look to see, I'm always making decisions. Again, should we keep doing things the way we're doing? Is it just like the frames that have to make our business profitable are, discount vision plans. If they're not filling the right need in my practice, then they'll get the boot too. So I look carefully, not only are they bringing patients in, but what are those patients doing? Are they exam only? Are they spending? Are they being profitable? I mean, we've done a very, very good job here of working hard to make sure that we are recouping a lot of out-of-pocket costs from these plans. I personally don't mind these plans. I know that is a statement that most optometrists don't say. I'm not here just to collect a $40 exam fee. If that's all we were getting, then I'd probably feel very differently. And I wouldn't be able to see one patient every 45 minutes. But, we have a huge multiple pair percentage, which is something else I track. These patients are not getting only what's covered. So to me, it's an entry point for them to get into the practice and then also do other things and buy multiple pairs. But I'm tracking that to make sure, while as we get busier, that you don't rest on your laurels and say, well, we're really busy. But are those patients, are they the right patients that we're attracting? And is it the right profitability for the practice?
So I want to caution to not name names of companies, but is it your sense that patients of some of what you I love how you call them discount vision plans,
Not
but
insurance.
no, never use the word insurance, folks. It's not insurance. Um, that some of those plans are more likely to have subscribers who will buy multiple pairs, or are you not able to ascertain that?
I don't look anymore. I used to
Mm,
look. So we actually use like a single piece of paper that's a routing sheet, and the insurance information's on the back. So I actually don't look. And I feel like for me, I think there's always a little prejudice in my mind of what I think
mm,
of which patients are going to spend and which aren't. So I actually like not looking at the moment, and
okay.
I don't see what they have. And, then I see it when they leave, because I'll see, whether, um, I'll see the benefits after. So I don't look when they're here. In my old practice, we would print out the sheets so I could see their benefits right there, but I don't look. So I think for me, it helps me not kind of think ahead of, okay, this contact lens fee is going to be 10% discount versus a $60 copay. Do they really need this contact lens? Because they only get a discount with one plan, and another plan, they have a copay. I don't want that to affect my decision making for the patient. So I don't look at it at all. And then I do see it at the end. I do know I can find out easily, but I've actually stopped looking so that I don't start to prejudge what I want them to do based on what their insurance is or their discount plan.
Have you been able to develop a sense of if your revenue per patient? I don't know if you have a broad number that you currently are tracking for revenue per patient. If it's substantially different for these discount plan patients, or if it's pretty similar to a cash patient.
It's way lower. I mean, our cash patients are significantly higher. I think our data gets a little skewed because these patients have multiple pairs
Right.
or multiple things they're doing, and that becomes a cash pay part
Oh,
of.
okay. Okay.
So if they get 4 pairs, that first pair is insurance, but then the other pairs are cash pay. So I think
Okay.
sometimes the numbers can be a little bit skewed, or they're coming in multiple times throughout the year. So our cash pay per patient revenue is significantly more than both of the vision discount plans. Those are very similar to each other. Both are way above the national average. So I'm fine there. But the cash pay, private pay patient is significantly higher.
Now, one of the things you'd mentioned to me is that you build like a training protocol or a job improvement or enhancement plan based upon data, how you measure how your team performs. Could you give an example or two of things that you've done that have come out of the data that has caused an employee to go from here to here?
One of the things I love to do is not just look at what's being sold and what our revenue per patient is or what our frames are, but then actually break it down. I have a small team, so there's 2 people. I don't count in that. The frame sales don't go under me. But I can look and see how are we doing with certain metrics, whether it's non-glare or second pair sales or progressives or photochromic lenses. I can actually look at what the 2 people on my team are doing. And if I notice a huge discrepancy between those 2, I can figure out why. And maybe it is that, I have one full-time and one part-time, but I don't necessarily look at the number of jobs they've done. It's their percentage of what they're doing. So is there a big discrepancy? Is one person doing 100% non-glare and somebody's doing 60%? If I only looked at that overall metric, it might look artificially high. Maybe it's 90% non-glare, but if I dig deep in that, one person's doing 100% of that and the other person's falling behind. So it allows me to have kind of quick, non-formal, not a performance review, but to say, hey, I noticed that last patient didn't get non-glare. What was their pushback? Is there a way that what did they say? And can I, and the way I phrase it is not you did something wrong. It's what can I do in the exam room better to set you up for success? Did I not talk about blue light? And, can I do a better job in the exam room of setting up that conversation to make you successful? And then also, I can have the rep come in. Should we do another lunch and learn? Are there things that we're not always on top of? But I phrase it more of what can I do better in the exam room and because we all know whatever we say matters. And what we say is so powerful. And I am guilty, as everybody, of there's only a certain amount of time, right? I only want a max of 30 minutes total for that patient. So how can I make that minute, and not the 30 minutes doesn't include just my time. So how can I be super efficient with what I'm saying in there to set my team up better for success? Not just, you need to sell more blue light. You should be asking patients about it. They shouldn't hear about it for the first time in the optical. I should be talking about it more in the exam room so that when they go out to the optical, oh, it looks like Dr. Stewart mentioned blue light. Yes, she talked about that with my computer. Absolutely. That's something I want to have. Now their percentage goes from 60 to 100%.
Yeah. As a related sidebar again, are you a believer in writing multiple RXs for multiple pairs? I have to ask because it's interesting. I went with my some family friends to a little birthday thing the other night, and my buddy pulls out his paper printed off RX from his optometrist, and it's a single vision near RX. He's post cataract. He's going to get his one pair of glasses now, and he's told them he only wants single vision readers. And so I thought it was great that he created that, but the patient realized that if Medicare is going to pay for something, it might as well be something that's bifocal, even though he's not really going to use them much. And now he needs that other RX, and the guy never created it, the doctor being the guy. So I'm thinking, I always would advise doctors to create multiple RXs in the software, even if that's maybe a little time intensive, because it helps our teams perform, right? It's there. But I don't know, in electronic records, maybe that's something people don't do. How about you?
I send them all through. So I will say it's a patient who needs both distance and reading. I will send through a progressive, a distance, a reading, and a sunglass at the minimum. I send them all through, and we have a routing sheet, and I circle them all on there. And I will try, as I'm circling, I will tell them briefly, this would be a benefit, this would be a benefit, this would be a benefit, and this. So when they go out to the optical, they're not fumbling around trying to find a prescription. It doesn't look like a disconnect. Once in a while, I do forget. They're like, Doc, can you send through that? But I try and do it for everybody so that it's there. Or if they, we are a very walkable practice, so they might pop in. This happened last week. I was off for the week. I came in last week with my mom for an adjustment. I was not working. And there was a patient with an outside RX here, and his doctor had just written, kind of an outside, distance and near, and he's a cyclist. And he said, I'm glad you're here. I want to do a pair for biking. Like, what do you suggest? So I said, don't mind me in shorts and a t-shirt. I'm not really working. But we, kind of worked through that where it really was what was on his prescription. But I said, this is why you should have this, and this is the type of lens you should have. And, I didn't do it. I didn't do the exam, but if somebody had done that a little bit, it would have made our job a little easier. But on the flip side, that's why he comes here, because he knows that he's just bringing in a piece of paper with numbers, but the real magic of what we do here is what we do with those numbers. So I think, the more prescriptions I can give them up front, they pull them up and say, it looks like Dr. Stewart talked about a progressive pair for every day, a computer pair for when you're on the computer with blue light, a good reading pair for when you're reading in bed, and a sunglass pair so that you can drive with your glasses on. So let's take care of all those today. And they have them all there too.
Well, we got on the topic of data and we got into sort of practice and business mindset. And I love that. And as a speaker who's out there a lot, I appreciate you giving us all this detail. So I'll let you have the last word. You've been driving businesses, eye care businesses, through data, through measurement. Like, tell the audience what they might want to do if they haven't been doing it. Is there a metric or two they really should focus on to start a deeper dive into their business?
I would say pick one, pick something.
Okay.
Don't get overwhelmed. Don't, look at a dashboard and get overwhelmed by everything. Pick one, and whatever that one is, start there and track that for 3 months and set a goal. Make that goal, a smart goal. Make sure it's, a measurable goal. It's time sensitive. You give your team good feedback and good strategy on what you want to do and how you would like them to do it, but also take ownership that you need to be the one driving that metric. We can't go out to our opticals and write one prescription and say to our staff, Dr. Stewart says her patients are getting 4 pairs. You need to do a better job and sell 4 pairs of glasses, when you're not having that conversation in the exam room. It 100% comes from me. I own that. And I know it's my duty to make sure that I set my team up for success. So if it's a metric, pick the metric you want, but really think about what you can do as a business owner and the leader of your practice to drive that metric. Give your staff the support they need, the training, utilize your reps. Don't be afraid to close for an hour and do a training, and then measure that for 3 months and be diligent about it. And I always say, celebrate the successes, when things move, celebrate that. And then in 3 months, pick another one, but don't forget about your first one. Keep that one going. But, don't go into your staff, after you've listened and say, I picked 5 KPIs that we are going to track and we're going to improve, because they're going to look at you like you're crazy and then just turn around and go back to what they're doing. So don't overwhelm your team. Don't feel, if you're not tracking anything, that you're a failure. It's hard. It's boring sometimes. I love it, but pick things that are impactful to whatever your practice is. And that's going to look different for everybody. But pick something that's meaningful, that you have a way to improve. Like for us, our anti-reflective percentage is 99% to 100%. So I'm not going to pick that and say, like, you can't really grow that. So pick something that is achievable, but not impossible. But it should scare you a little bit and make your team work a little bit hard.
Yeah, it's all about working hard. And Dr. Jennifer Stewart, you do that. Thanks for being my guest on today's Think Again podcast.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for today's Think Again podcast, brought to you by GPN Visions, a peer-to-peer learning community to help grow your eye care business.